Chapter 16, Part 2, First Years of Elementary School. Mom came and won the custody of me, and she was asked to stay in the country in order to maintain custody. Herself, she lived in Tel Aviv with another man, the aforementioned Zaiki. Before she set out for the adventure to the United States, I went to first grade at the only school that was in the settlement. It was called Nun Dalet HaMamlachti in honor of the 54 soldiers that have been killed in fighting for the claiming of the settlement. It's called Nun Dalet because the letter Nun is 50 and Dalet is the fourth letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and to add them together, they make 54. The Hebrew alphabet has a numerical value to every letter. Our class grade was called by the Hebrew alphabet. First grade is Kita Aleph, second grade is Kita Bet, and on in the alphabet it goes until Kita Yud. Bet, which together is Yud Bet, reading from right to left. The letter Yud is the letter value of 10, which also happens to be the 10th letter of the alphabet. After that letter, the numerical value of the ensuing letters increases in multiples of 10. The letter Bet is the second letter of the alphabet and holds the value of 2. Together, 10 plus 2, they signify the value of 12. Isn't that fascinating? The science of the mathematical value of the alphabet, language, and math all enmeshed into one. We start from first grade and end with 12th grade together. We wouldn't separate throughout our school years unless our circumstances separate us from each other. At least it was true in our settlement, because there was one educational facility for the entire settlement. The difference between the United States and Israel is that in Israel there are 2 levels of government-subsidized education: Yesodi, elementary school, and Tichon, high school. There is no middle school. 7th grade is when you start high school. The way our school was structured was that it had both the elementary and the high school together. In one facility, At the end of the last year of high school, students pass mandatory testing called Bagrut, maturity. In the United States, students get a choice between taking the SATs or not, which is like Bagrut testing in Israel. In Israel, Bagrut testing is not a matter of choice, no matter what kind of educational plans you set towards. After passing the Bagrut testing, students go to a mandatory service to the army unless there are special circumstances for exemption. Girls serve 2 years and boys 3 years. After that, they pass additional tests to get accepted to universities of their choice or do other things if they wish. It's not like the SATs in high schools in the United States that determine your eligibility to universities. To get accepted to universities in Israel, you have to take their own testing specific to their institution. Regardless of what students set to do, our children in Israel grow up much faster intellectually than your children in the United States. Nobody slips in between the cracks. In the United States, education is nothing but chaos. I want to scream at my generation here. I'm so ashamed of my generation of kids in the United States, at least in the area where I live. The generation after me is even worse. Kids of today's high school age, The way our school was planned is that we had one main teacher called Mechanechet who taught us most of the school subjects. Within the first week of the school year, she would create a unanimous schedule for the entire class grade where we would mostly sit in our permanently assigned classroom from period to period unless there were non-academic classes such as art or PE, or we had to use a science lab class at another location of the school. Every student in our grade had the same schedule of classes to abide by. Within the first week of the school, our teacher would dedicate one period to making a chart on the board of the official and finalized schedule for the entire school year. We had to copy the schedule of classes of the entire week on our Yoman school planner manually. We didn't have printed copies of our schedule distributed to each student. It was our responsibility to keep track of it and know which books to bring every day, because every day it was a different set of classes. I didn't carry all of my books in my backpack every day. I packed the appropriate books for the next day every night. The reason why they do it that way is because if we put effort in writing down the schedule, we're more likely to appreciate the document and not lose it. Teachers don't have time to constantly print schedules for careless and irresponsible students throughout the year. Also, if you did happen to lose the original copy of your schedule that you copied from the board, you get to rely on your peers. The probability of the entire class losing the schedule is slim to none. Therefore, this way is very convenient, and on top of that, this is one practice that promotes interdependence. In the United States, however, every student has their own unique schedule of classes, which does not promote interdependence in any way. In Israel, we had over 8 subjects to cover, depending on which grade level you were in. The higher the grade level, the more subjects you had. In one school day, other than Friday, we had 6 periods, which was considered a full school day. In the United States, you are forced to sit through full 8 periods, and you only have 8 subjects to care about. You take the same subjects at the same period every day, while in Israel, every day of the week had a specific set of classes. In Israel, however, every Friday our school day was shorter. In the last period of that day, before going home, our mechanechet would conclude the week by lighting the Shabbat candles, after which we would sing patriotic songs, bid Shabbat Shalom to each other, and merrily go home. If you are in high school in Israel, you don't come to school on Fridays at all, but Sunday in Israel is a regular business and school day. In the United States, in most schools, there are no short days in any of the 5 business days, as Friday is a regular business day and Sunday is free. In Israel, our seats would be strictly assigned by the mechanechet on the first day of class, and they were permanent throughout the entire year. Unless the mechanechet decided to switch the formation of the tables and reassign new seats, we didn't get to choose where we sat, and no one got to complain. Also, we didn't have single tables. We were partnered up in tables that fit 2, and the 2 of us had to figure out how to share the space of the table. Sometimes the tables were situated in ways against each other so that we had to sit in a group. Our mechanechet was allowed to use the space and the arrangement of the tables however she or he chose and however conducive it was for her or his purposes. Other teachers of other subjects other than the mechanechet had no say in that respect. They had to accommodate themselves to whatever arrangement of the classroom the mechanechet decided to partake, because she or he were the ones that taught most of the subjects of that particular grade class that she or he was in charge of. If you happened to not get along with a classmate you sat with, then too bad for you. They would simply say, titmoded עם זה. Deal with it and move on with their business. For example, one time in 2nd grade, I was sitting next to a guy named Eliran, and he was always playing with his eyelids, turning them inwardly, flashing their innards. Not only was it extremely distracting, but it was also disgusting. I raised my index finger in the middle of a class lecture, which, by the way, in Israel, if you want the right to speak, you don't raise your full hand. Rather, you raise your index finger pointing upwards. Carmela, my 2nd grade mechanechet at the time, gave me the floor. I complained about Eliran to the entire class and demanded her to do something about it. She simply said, יבוא היום מתי שלא תפסיקו להתנשק עם אחד את השני. There will come a day when you will not stop making out with one another. And the entire class unanimously went, Ich, which means ew. Eliran simply smiled impishly at me, continued grossing me out, and I had to deal with it, which was Carmela's humorous and uncanny way of saying just that. In dealing with it, I had to make the best out of what I had. Eventually, I learned to ignore him, and he got tired of it and stopped. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is that the mechanechet never agreed to change student seats chart on students' request, no matter how desperately they pleaded. The benefit of that is that you are taught to get along with problematic students, and the teachers have an easier time getting to know the students on a personal level and implement control over the class, which is reflective of how adult life is. In the professional arena, you don't get to choose your co-workers and you have to find a way to get along. And that arrangement was the first step to get youngsters to mastering that skill. One thing to note, though, is that this seating chart is not random. The mechanechet knows the strengths and the weaknesses of each student, and her decision of who sits next to who is strategically complementary to each student so that students will help each other, which in turn helps her keep everybody on point. Pedagogy is a form of thoughtful strategy and art in Israel. While in the United States, however, you have single tables which contribute to the American antisocial ways from a young age, and you sit wherever you want in the class, which contributes to the classroom disorderliness. The consequences of the United States' poor teaching styles are simple. Also, no child is labeled as ADHD or any other learning disabilities in Israel. In my opinion, those are labels to justify the kids' laziness. Everybody is under the same uniform level of expectations. In the United States, it's a whole different approach, which I think is slowing down kids' potential. One major difference between the U.S. school system and the Israeli school system is that the process of learning a material is encouraged to be learned collectively in Israel. We're all taught what interdependence means, but the United States teaches their kids individualism, independence, and to be obsessively concerned about the success of only yourself without allowing the students to understand what teamwork means. It teaches how to depend on your own self and your own wits, so it is easy to slip in between the cracks. While in Israel, peers are encouraged to help each other learn the material. On top of that, in the United States, the material that elementary school kids are taught is just scarily and absurdly unchallenging. In Israel, the teachers are not stuck in their classroom all day long during recesses. During recesses, teachers hang out together in Chadar Morim, the teacher's lounge, which gives them the opportunity to interact with their colleagues and give each other useful techniques or advice on problematic students that they share or share any other worthy information about their students. If they wish, they can hang out outside and interact with kids, not supervising them, no matter how old they are. They allow kids to resolve their conflicts first amongst themselves. If they can't and it goes out of proportion, teachers instill more tactful disciplinary acts that teach some kind of moral to the kid. We were also not supervised in kindergarten. If you put yourself in danger on the playground, you suffer the consequences, and you know better the next time to apply more caution, even if it meant to break your arm. In the United States, kids are constantly under adult supervision, which I think is ridiculous. It doesn't allow them to explore the world on their own, and it doesn't prepare them for their adult life when nobody is supervising you and you have to answer for your own mistakes. On top of that, in Israel, we're required to pack our own lunch. There's no lunch provided for us. Although I like being spoiled in the United States with standing in line and getting fancy meals, It didn't prepare me for the real world when I started working and I had to be in the habit of packing my own lunch. Honestly speaking, though, Grandma always packed my lunch, so I was always also spoiled in elementary school, and it didn't work out in my favor in the long run. Anyway, speaking of recesses, we have 10 minutes recesses after every period, while the United States has one huge 1 hour recess for the entire day and no break in between periods. The mind cannot go so long without a break and effectively absorb the material taught, in my opinion. In my opinion, our backpacks would remain in our assigned permanent for the year classrooms throughout the entire day. If we happen to have a class not located in our permanently assigned classroom and we take our backpacks to that class, then after the class ends, we take our backpacks back to the assigned classroom and leave our backpacks there unsupervised during recesses. We do not leave our backpacks in a classroom that is not our permanently assigned classroom. During recess, children hang out wherever they want. They can be inside their permanently assigned classroom or go outside. They are not allowed to be in a classroom that is not permanently assigned for them. In the United States, however, you are not allowed to be inside any classroom. You must hang out. You must hang outside. In Israel, throughout the school day, our backpacks were to only remain hanging in the back of our permanently assigned seats in our permanently assigned class, no matter where we happen to be in the school. We don't carry it from place to place every period like nomads or travelers of some sort. Moreover, we don't go to our teachers if we happen to have a different teacher the following period. Rather, they come to our class from period to period. If they need us at a different location, then they come to our permanently assigned class, take the entire class to a different classroom, and we walk to that classroom as a whole class. While in the United States, each student has his own unique schedule of classes where the location of each class subject is spread all over the school campus. And after every bell, they have to frantically move from place to place, bumping into other students, creating traffic and chaos, and worrying about being late if they linger in the previous class, which allows them to feel like the world is only revolving around them. Most teachers in Israel, especially the mechanechet, is responsible to teach several subjects, and in the United States, each teacher only specializes in one single subject, which means that our teachers are way more well-rounded. In the United States, you have one teacher for each subject, which means if you have 8 subjects, you have 8 teachers. A student, for this reason, can't really create a meaningful and steady relationship with their teachers, while in Israel, we have about 3 or 4 teachers, and such relationships can be formed. However, I suspect that that is so because the United States is much bigger population-wise than Israel. Israel only has 8 million, while the United States is cramped with 318 million. And that is why Israel has a very personalized system of education, while the United States is coldly impersonal. Still, the United States has no excuse. Nevertheless, homework and organization was a big part of my life while being in elementary school. There was a list of workbooks and textbooks that had to be bought from bookstores with their own official publishers before every school year. Every new school year, I was always excited to peruse through the pages and get an idea of what we were going to cover before the school year started. Everyone had a yoman, a school planner. It was a must during my grade school. Israel invests in all kinds of creative and engaging forms of school planners. Yomanim, with all kinds of captivating themes, particularly focused on helping young students to be organized. I couldn't live without my Yoman in Israel because we had a bunch of homework every day, a bunch of announcements to keep in mind, and my Yoman had my manually copied schedule of classes that I referred to on a daily basis to determine which books to carry for the next day. In the United States, although I had a lot of homework too, only because I was diligent in completing my assignments that any other kid would have completed in a matter of an hour, I didn't have so many subjects to care about that I was able to be without a Yoman. I just simply relied on my memory. In the United States, however, in elementary school level, homework is a matter of 1 hour a day, and it is also disorderly scattered on printed pages that you have to keep in a binder. In Israel, there is no such thing as binders and three-hole punched papers. This just gets messy and confusing. Only administrations or businesses use those, not students. Everything is kept together. Each subject required its own notebook, and each subject had its own workbook and textbook. Let me remind you that we had over 8 subjects. Some of them didn't require textbooks, but each of them had an interactive workbook. You had to maintain the shape of your workbooks, textbooks, and notebooks by buying specific protective covers for them, because especially notebooks start wearing out throughout the year. On a daily basis, we took thorough notes from the board on our notebooks during each class subject and assigned homework on certain pages of our books or reading in our textbooks. Every time we took notes from the board, we were required to write the date, the universal date, in Hebrew called Ta'arich HaLoazi, and the Jewish calendar date. It was indicated on the board and changed by the teacher every day, enforcing the students to record the date on each of their notes improves organization. Our notes that we had to copy from the board were literally long reports. While in the United States, except maybe math, teachers don't write notes on the board and don't have dates indicated on the board on a daily basis. They just lecture throughout the entire period, expecting the students to catch everything they say. Writing things down allows you to remember the material better. There's none of that in the United States. One detail worth mentioning about the Israeli school educational system is that there are no semesters. The entire year is counted as one whole. They count the grades to a 100-point grade average. Another difference between the United States school system and Israeli is that you, as the student, don't get to find out your cumulative scores in your subjects way until the very last day of school, when they give you a beautifully embellished Teudat Tziyun, grade certificate, that is signed by the mechanechet and the principal of the school. The percentage grade of each subject that you have earned is handwritten in pen. All students' grades of tests and major projects are recorded on a grade notebook. At least that is how it was then. To be honest with you, I like it that way a lot more than digitized recording of grades, because the document created manually is more meaningful. But what can I say? The world is moving to the robotic age as human efforts become nothing but futility, while the old-fashioned ways become detestable unless appraised by societies. But that is a whole different kind of frustration. To continue on this topic, we only get official credit for the test we take and major group or individual projects we complete. We don't get any credit for completing our daily assigned homework. The teachers just give random checks for the completion of homework when they feel like it, by summoning each student to come up to them with the workbook specific to their subject to see if you in fact completed the assigned homework pages. If you happen not to complete it, you get to experience the wrath upon you and be humiliated in front of the entire class, which is a very daunting experience. There are no kids pestering teachers to know their cumulative grades constantly throughout the year like I see in college or high school. Because of the competitive admissions of universities, teachers wouldn't allow it. There is no sending progress reports to the parents every couple of weeks. In fact, there is no such thing as progress reports. Teachers have better things to do than meddle with all this nonsense paperwork. There are parent conferences for that to find out how your kid is doing in their classes throughout the year. And even in parent conferences, you don't get to find out your physical grade. Teachers just comment on your work ethic and overall performance. This approach allows students to study for the passion of the material and not for a letter grade. Besides that, receiving your grade certificate every year without knowing your cumulative grade is suspenseful and analogous to the experience of receiving your diploma. On the last day of school, at the end of the day, the mechanechet has everybody's grade certificate, which is not just a lousy piece of paper. It's in the likeness of an award. She calls out each student's name one by one, and they get up and take their walk of pride towards the mechanechet in front of the class. The mechanechet tells him or her some valuable words of compliments and wisdom in front of the entire class about them, hugs and kisses them, and they return to their assigned seat with their grade certificate in their hand. Only then, for the first time in the entire year, you get to see your officially stamped grades in the subjects that you look. If you didn't do so well, you feel an amazing sense of shame and disappointment about yourself. In the United States, receiving constant progress reports throughout the year is like distributing candy, and students don't take pride in their education, making the document completely insignificant. On top of that, it adds a significant amount of paranoia and stress. The act of constantly keeping up with your not finalized grade feels like you have to carry the world in the palm of your hand. It's burdensome and stressful. You can't change the past. The only thing you can do is prepare for the future. Therefore, sometimes I think ignorance is rather bliss. My motto is just do your best, and the rest will take care of itself without being harsh on yourself. If you didn't do well on the test, there is always a new day to do better on the next. That attitude keeps the stress at bay. Your eyes on the mastery of the material and not have over obsessive thoughts of grades. I hope I'm making sense. In the United States, however, everybody studies for a letter grade, and school is a matter of complete competition. While in Israel, if you master the subject, you spread your wealth with other students, and school is about self-enrichment, learning from your mistakes, friendship, unity, progress, and many more. In the United States, school is nothing but a matter of competition. In Israel, it's the teacher's full responsibility to make sure that the kid is doing their work and keeps up with the material, and less of those of the parents. The parents' job is to feed, clothe, provide shelter, and supposedly love them. That is it. Children's education is on the teachers. Full pressure. Therefore, in Israel, teachers are considered like second parents to the students, who take a personal interest in each student and invest their time, breath, and effort. I mean, they are strict. They don't shy away from screaming at you if you don't do your work with full effort and follow your greatest potential. In the United States, the teachers are completely impersonal. They don't have a good control of their class, and students don't exercise respect for them. They can't raise their authoritative voice at their students because the American society believes that that's detrimental to the kid for the fear it might lessen the kid's self-esteem. Who came up with that philosophy? It's ridiculous, folks. Let me inform you. Kids need pushing. An enforced structure and appreciation of authority that has their best interests at heart. My teachers in Israel screamed at misbehaving students left and right with shrill, ear-piercing voices, setting disorderly students right into place, although they are prohibited from exercising physical punishment. In some countries, like the former Soviet Union, that used to be allowed. Furthermore, unlike the United States, we call our teachers straight by their first name, which breaks the ice and sets some sort of sense of familiarity. While in the United States, you have to call your teachers Mrs. or Mr. followed by their last name that creates a level of distance between the students and teachers. I don't like it. I like to create a meaningful connection with my teachers, and this kind of formality makes it harder. What I also find completely outrageous in the United States is that kids don't know how to properly hold a pencil in second grade, and the teachers don't mind those students setting bad habits. while my pencil-holding habits were rebuked in kindergarten. My dad says that Israel has a low standard of education. Go to United States and you will see low standards. My teachers in the United States were fully impressed by my language and mathematical skills, studiousness, diligence, and commitment when I thought that I was just an average kid and everyone was at the same skill level as me, but I was deeply mistaken. So let me put this even in simpler terms. Based on my sense of comparison between the Israeli ways of education and the United States ways of education, I firmly conclude that the United States form of education is, in the Hebrew expression, al panim, which literally means on the face. In other words, when something horrific happens, you put your hands on your face in feeling the overwhelming disaster of the United States approach to education in this context. Because of a disastrous form of education of the United States, the generation of today, in nicely put terms, is hollow, shallow, and imprudently imbecilic. I find it as a major threat that the American society does not properly invest in its children. Children are our future. Without them, we have a hopeless and grim future. But what is America's priority? Investing all their time, money, and effort into a ridiculously huge army in order to maintain the title of it being a superpower, have the right to order countries around, and have a super inflated ego. There, I have said it, and don't you dare call me biased. All of the above information is true and applicable to the K through 12 educational system in Israel, not only elementary school. Now that I gave you a brief compare and contrast synopsis between our school system and yours, let me delve into my first 3 school years. In first grade, we were taught the 5 books of Torah verbally within 1 year, and we specifically were taught that Adam and Eve both were made in the image of God. In second grade, we started to learn the first book of the Torah, called Bereshit, Genesis, more thoroughly from a workbook and actually reading the script from the Torah once we learned the Hebrew alphabet and knew how to read. To get a deeper appreciation of the Torah, that year our class went to Kfar Saba, which literally translates as village of grandpa, where we learned about Sofer Stam, which literally translates as just an author, who rewrites copies of the Bible manually. The script of the Bible is written on a scroll-like card, called in Hebrew klaf, and we were explained that if there had been one letter that was not written correctly within the page with a wrong squiggly line, they would have to start over. Each of us got to write our names on a piece of that scroll-like card with a special feathery ink pen to get a feel of what it was like to be Sofer Stam. Grandpa always held onto that klaf inside the cover of her camera. On top of that, we held the Torah book upward over our heads like in Simchat Torah, the rejoicing of the Torah, and walked forward with it to symbolize that there's no life without the Word of God. During the second grade, I was a part of the gymnastics team. I was at the lowest level due to my low level of flexibility. Our levels were called by the names of fruits and birds so as not to get children and upperclassmen self-conscious or too cocky about their abilities. I was in Snunit, which means sparrow. My friend Masha started from Snunit but advanced to Duvdevan, which means cherry, which was the second level of difficulty. In 1998, we had a jubilee for our settlement. It was 20 years old, and I was in the gymnastic performance where each level performed a choreographed dance. I don't remember how many levels there were all in all. While getting ready, I saw a sign that said that the Messiah would come in the year 2000. I couldn't understand what that meant. We were told of the waiting of the Messiah, but why we needed him, I didn't quite understand. There were 5,000 people coming to see us perform from all over the Bekat Yarden, the Valley of Jordan, which is the compilation of all the settlements across the West Bank. Ma'ale Ephraim is the capital of all the settlements in the Bekat Yarden. I snoozed a little bit past our assigned time to perform, but I didn't give up. I hurriedly went behind the stage and fell down and scraped my knee while running backstage, but I didn't dare to cry because I had a responsibility. responsibility to carry through. I got up and joined into sync of the choreography of our dance. The entire performance was unspeakably spectacular. That year, Grandma, I, and all of my friends went to Caesarea, Caesarea in Hebrew, where the place was simulated to look in the appearance of the Roman times. Caesarea used to be a Roman city that to this day has its spacious outdoors built in stadiums. There was a girl dressed like a gypsy who asked me if I would like her to read my hand. I agreed, and she said that my life is full of adventure, but it is very short. The fact that it is full of adventure turned out to be very true, but whether it is short or not, we are still to find out. I also vividly remember how our class went to the old city in Jerusalem that school year. In the entrance of the old city, there was a beggar lady, old in age, sitting emptily staring into the distance. I took pity on her. Although I had no money, I had a piece of chocolate on me. I gave her the chocolate, and her eyes shined like two crystals out of thankfulness. She didn't have to say any word. We both felt good. As my class toured the old city, we were introduced to the 7 gates of it. First, the new gate, Shar Chadash, the Damascus gate, Shar Shechem, Herod's gate, Shar Aprachim, also known as the Flowers Gate, Lions Gate, Shar Ha'arayot, Dung Gate, fifth one, Dung Gate, Shar Ha'ashbot, literally translate as dumpsters gate. 6, Zion Gate, Shar Tzion, and 7th gate, Jaffa Gate, Shar Yafo. We were explained that the Messiah would come from the Lion's Gate because he is supposed to be from the tribe of Judah, whose symbolism is a lion. Who exactly that Messiah would be, we stubbornly would not be explained. During Purim in 2nd grade, we were taught how to wear breathing face masks as a precautionary exercise in case Saddam Hussein were to start a chemical war against us. It was just perceived as a jolly exercise in honor of Purim, and no one was panicked by the possibility. When I was in 2nd grade visiting my dad, though, during one of the holiday breaks, I also started a very shameful habit. My dad had a dog, Tishka, and I was cruel to it. I would pick up his hind legs and make him walk on his forelegs. On top of that, one day, while I was sitting on the floor against the wall, Tishka started sniffing me in my groin area. The thing is, we emit certain pheromones from that area that dogs are very sensitive and attracted to. The right thing to do is to take their nose and pull it away, but not me. I was interested to know what he was sniffing. So I bared the flesh of my 7-year-old vagina, curious to know what he would do. Tishka started licking it, and I, in return, started to have an amazing flush of physical pleasure spiking in my head. What? You want to sit and judge me? Better look at your own heart before judging me. Dad never caught me in the act, and I have repented for this one to God. Therefore, my butt is covered. If homosexuality is allowed, why wouldn't bestiality be allowed to? That's not fair. The dog makes me feel happy. In fact, I think I want to marry him. Whoever wants to object, say it now or forever hold your peace. As Tishka and I stand under a kuppah, a marriage booth with a rabbi. What's wrong? Disgusted? I think you are discriminating against me. Having a dog as my husband would be much less drama than having a human husband. He wouldn't tell me what to do, and all I need to feed him with would be dog food, which is much easier. I think I would be able to handle that kind of marriage as a 7-year-old too. Don't you think? What's wrong? Do you not approve of this kind of marriage? If homosexual marriage is allowed, why wouldn't we stretch it? Let's allow incest marriage, let's allow pedophilic marriage, polygamy, bestiality, and many more creative practices. Let's just fornicate with all of each other on the streets, under the sun, in the open, and have a huge orgy. Why is that a problem? I have a better idea. Let's have sex with horses too, something I saw while watching porno. I think that was genius. What do you think I am, Jesus? I'm far from him. I will tell you that up front. There's nothing wrong with all those practices if we allow the logic to stretch to infinite measures. If one is allowed, so the other logically should be allowed. You think I am the only one that had that happening with their dog? Go to Google and type "my dog licked my vagina" and watch how many results you are going to have. Countless, I guarantee you. I checked. Let me be quite frank with my readers. God does not bless homosexual marriage. No matter if you go left or right, up or down, when God does not bless a practice, there's no fruitfulness in it, and it only taints our spiritual well-being. That digs us to the ground. We can't sit and pretend as a society that is acceptable by God, because stretching and testing God's law would lead to stretching another, and societal regimes are going to collapse just like they did in the end of the Roman Empire. God loves homosexuals, but he does not approve of their lifestyle. You can sit and claim that God is a discriminatory being, but let me shake you to reality by saying that God can discriminate whatever human practice he wants. It is his world, and this world is going to be exclusively run by his rules. To sit and pretend like that practice should be normalized and put under a lawful institution puts us under a delusionary thinking. Do not practice homosexuality, having sex with another man as with a woman. It is a detestable sin. Leviticus 18:22. Simple. Marriage should be only defined by the mutual binding of the flesh and the spirit between a man and a woman. Why? Because that is how God created it since the very beginning of times. Period. God does not bless incest too. None of you shall approach any one of his close relatives to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, which is the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your sister, your father's daughter or your mother's daughter, whether brought up in the family or in another home. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your son's daughter, or of your daughter's daughter, for their nakedness is your own nakedness. Leviticus 8:6-18. Bestiality is also not acceptable, if that surprises you. Neither shalt thou lie with any beast to defile thyself therewith. Neither shall any woman stand before a beast to lie down thereto. It is confusion. Leviticus 18:23. As if one might think that God didn't foresee it happening. If we start questioning the underlying reasons as to why God set those boundaries upon humanity, we should start questioning the right to his sovereignty to the world. Folks, let me reiterate that he is God. Whenever you become God of the world, you would be able to create your own rules. Not following God's rules means you are following Satan's rules. Satan's rules are super easy to follow, but God's consequence of following Satan's rules backfire on you. Following God's rules gives you a deep sense of soulful fulfillment. To continue, in the summer of 1999, as I finished second grade, my step-cousin David came from the United States. Willie, my grandmother's brother, is David's grandfather. He stayed with us for 3 months, and I enjoyed every moment of it. He was 14 years old and I was around 8. First of all, David looks magical. He has red hair and blue eyes. Grandma and he turned the place into a colorful paradise with skillful gardening. I was all haughty that I was housing an American relative of mine, which the entire neighborhood was excited about. But in his due time, he left. In third grade, I got a cat that Mom and I called Cleopatra. For short, Cleo. She gave birth to 3 kittens on my bed one morning while I was getting ready to go to school. That time, I had a very good friend who was a recent Russian immigrant. Her name was Tanya. She had red hair and was full of freckles. Her appearance looked very unique. She pretended that she didn't speak Hebrew as her Hebrew became measurably sufficient. She was 2 years older than me. She was so innocent but set-minded in her naivety. At the time, she cherished her persona that she said to herself, and I cherished it too. Danya and I like playing with those kittens. Together we went to the orthodontist, we had many sleepovers, and we didn't succumb to peer pressure. She was like my angel. Danya and I had a long and prospering friendship. She liked making sandwiches with cucumbers and putting sour cream on them. She also came with me to my visits in Ashkelon to see my dad and to all kinds of other trips throughout Israel. We were inseparable. I also had living chickens that I raised before having Cleo. I tortured these little things like there's no tomorrow. Mati, who was the principal and our mechanechet during my third grade, appointed me to check the entire school's level of cleanliness in each class of the entire school. I was supposed to go to each class and give them a grade for cleanliness and order. The chairs had to be put up over the tables so that their legs would stick upward and the floor swept. Each class had their schedule of who was cleaning after school on which days. The job was called Toranit for a female or Toran for a male. Eventually, whichever class accumulates the most points over a course of a month gets a reward and recognition. I was in charge of that as a third grader. It teaches collective responsibility, and in United States schools, there is none of that. You have janitors that you afford to pay that clean every single school day. In Israel, the janitors only cleaned the halls of the school or occasional deep cleaning of classes, and they came once or twice a week, definitely not every school day. In third grade, I had a very memorable situation that sticks with me to this day. My class was playing a game called Machanaim, which means two camps in Hebrew. The game is constructed in a way that it has two square fields outlined against each other, sharing one side in the center, creating two camps. I was really good at that game. We were playing that game during a PE class called Itamlut in Hebrew. And on that day, girls were playing Machanaim and boys were playing soccer. The PE teacher, who was a male, was playing soccer with the boys while we girls were playing Machanaim at a different part of the school, completely unsupervised. The class was separated into two camps or teams, and we had a ball the size of a volleyball. If one person threw the ball towards a person on the opposing team and it touched her body and bounced off, then that person gets outside the area of their square and goes to the opposing field, being outside the lines of the opposing team's square, facing the opponents inside the square. If the ball gets out of whichever side of the field, then the people outside that square on whichever side they are on get the ball and try to get the people of their opposing team out that are inside the square. The game begins, though, with two opposing teams' goalies, quote unquote, but eventually the number of the quote unquote goalie people increases as people inside the square get out. It gets confusing if you talk about it. I wish I could draw it. The point of the game is to get everybody on the opposing team that is inside the square out. The amazing thing in that game is that even if the ball bounced off of you, you still participate in the game, only as a goalie of some sort. If the ball bounces off of you and your teammate catches it, you are safe. I happened to lead my team as my opposing team was not successful in getting me out throughout the entire game. And my friend Alona happened to be on the opposing team. My team clearly won. I was there by myself getting all of them out. The bell rang, and when everybody scattered into different directions, her and I started to talk. Good game, but my team won, I concealedly and victoriously said in her face. No, it was a tekel, she answered defensively. Tekel means in Hebrew that neither team won, that both of them had the same score and it was even. I was angered and started to argue with her, and it escalated into a fight where we were viciously pulling each other's hair and fist fighting, while all the kids around us were calling each one of our names and cheering the fight on. Some were clapping and calling Alina. Others, with an rhythmic clap, were calling Alona. as if we were in gladiator games in a stadium or even better in Hunger Games. We were fighting for about 10 to 20 minutes because there was no adult there to separate us. At some point in the fight, because of the loud commotion, Mati finally came and separated us. The point to remember is that we were not supervised like students are supervised in the United States. Truthfully speaking, teachers have better things to do with themselves, you know. Mati brought us to her principal's office, gave us a stack of lined loose leaf paper, not one, two, or three loose leaf, a stack of paper with one single black pen to write with that she neatly placed in the center of the stack. After we were presented with the writing materials, she sternly commanded the two of us to write out the conflict, describing together the sequence and the apprising of events as they happened with as many specifics as was possible. We had to come up with some compromise. We weren't leaving the office until we came up with a final copy of the document. Mati distinctly instructed, however, that the final draft had to be neatly and coherently written, without any scratches over words and no in-between additions. The office was locked, and we had to knock only when we managed to finish the report in order for the secretary to unlock it. Where Mati spent the rest of the day, I don't know. What I do vividly remember is that the catch to this nearly non-accomplishable task was that Alona said one thing and I said another, and only the paper was acquiescently silent of being blank. Buttons were pressed, nerves were agitated, voices were modulating between us, frustrations were high, and no matter how temperamentally loud we were to each other, nobody interrupted the process. We were in a fancy conference room like two immensely heated politicians of opposing countries trying to negotiate a treaty. I was the recorder, and Alona dictated to me what to write. Because Israel is notorious with conflicts, solving conflicts among school children became a form of art. Every time one of us didn't like what the draft said, we crumpled the paper up and started all over, rewriting, overwriting, scratching, and adding. There were no whiteouts. It felt like it would never end. We had to miss all of our classes that day, and the task took us hours to complete to its entirety. In order to possibly accomplish it, we had to learn to reach some kind of compromise, which felt so painful at the beginning, like tearing a piece of flesh out of ourselves. Finally, we wrote a 5-page handwritten final draft as innumerable amounts of rough drafts were crumpled throughout the office. Once we agreed that that would be our final draft, we threw away all of our crumpled rough drafts. We had a lot of content to write because the fight was very long, full of vivid depictions of who started, who said what, and who did what to the other. When we knocked on the door for us to submit the paper, we were instructed to wait for Mati to come in. We didn't wait for long because school hours were over. Mati came in, closed the door for privacy again, read our report aloud to us, and once she finished reading all of the pages, she asked in confirmation, "זה מה שקרה, בנות? Is that what happened, girls?" We exchanged hesitating looks in between each other and then looked back at Mati, and with great reluctance we answered together in synchrony. "כן, yes. טוב, בנות, אתן חופשיות ללכת. Okay, girls, you are free to go." And we were officially dismissed. We were still not done being in the vicinity of each other. Both of us had to trek through the completely vacant school to grab our solitary backpacks in our assigned classroom, and only then the two of us dispersed into different directions, not speaking to each other for quite some while. We turned the fly into an elephant just to protect our egos. One thing I learned for the rest of my life from this torturous experience is to never lay a hand on anybody in school, no matter how much I was triggered. It also taught me an important aspect about life: negotiation and compromise. That's what you do when you are a part of society. What does the United States do with school conflicts? Call the parents, get the kids suspended, and the kids sit by himself all day long, or however long he was suspended for, not learning anything about morals of life, as the responsibility of a disciplinary action is hanging on the parents when the parents are busy providing for the kid. My grandma to this day wasn't informed of me viciously fighting with Alona. Over some time, Alona and I learned to forgive each other due to using the technique of camaraderie in writing the report. I will never forget that day. Although it was torture, it was worthwhile. The United States, on the opposite hand, is horrifying with its ways of discipline. I had the opportunity to work as a teacher's aide in an after-school program in my adult life in the United States and was appalled by what I observed. During third grade, there was one incident when Grandma and I were passing by Jerusalem Mall as we exited the bus station and entered the mall. The guards were checking us thoroughly. The guard asked my grandma, "Yesh lach neshek? Do you have weapons?" Grandma nodded her head into a yes without understanding what they were saying. I started laughing, but then they asked me if I had weapons, and I said, "En li neshek, aval lesavta sheli yesh." I don't have weapons, but Grandma has. Whether it was the truth or not, they had to take us to the police station and check. Grandma was asking me what was going on. "У тебя есть документы? Do you have documents?" I asked. "Конечно, of course," she answered as she shrugged. "Пригодятся, will be necessary," I warned. As we were driving, I was laughing and restrained the entire way, and the police officer sensed that something stank about me, but regardless, they had to check. When they brought Grandma and me to the police station, this time Grandma got a different translator. While I was sitting outside the conference room, I heard her scream in alarm, "Law, law, 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 no, no, no." The translator came out to me and looked at me. "Что, ты бабушке нормально перевести не могла? What, couldn't you translate normally to your grandma?" I took my right index finger and placed it on the right temple of my head, on the ridge of skin that I was born with, and twisted as I answered the translator, "Tupaya, retarded." Since then, Grandma never answered questions that she didn't know the translation of, but she was angry at me. Oh, those were the days when you could play games about such things. On top of that, in third grade, we learned a very important factor about life from the Bible that sticks with me to this day. The problem in the fact that we were studying the Bible is that we studied it strictly as a historical book and not as a spiritual guide like I found the Christians study it. We don't apply its lessons to today's life, to our personal life, which I later on learned that it is possible to do only when I moved to live with a Christian family. However, when I looked back on the studies that we had in elementary school, I learned how to apply the biblical concepts that were drilled into us since childhood only in my adult life. We were studying the book of Shmot, Exodus, that goes through explaining the Israelites' relationship to God. When God had finally taken them out of their destitution and slavery, they worshipped Him. When things got better for them and their life prospered, they slowly started forgetting God and began worshiping women, money, materialism, idols. God would punish them to get their attention, and things got worse for them, at which point they started remembering the existence of God and calling out to Him for help again. After God helped, they started worshiping God again, and the cycle continued endlessly on and on. Mati succinctly summarized the book of Shemot in 2 words: vicious cycle, galgal achzari. That extended throughout the Bible's recorded history, but isn't it like that through non-biblical recorded history too, when you come to think of it? I mean, modern times. At the time, I did not understand that we could have a relationship with God as strong. In fact, we should have a relationship with God. I only found out about that later in my life, but for now, the question remains to be, how do you have a relationship with God in a way that would enable us to keep our eyes straight on Him throughout our entire life, without going through the vicious cycle stages? That is food for thought and to get the wheels of your mind turning. On top of my academics, I was doing gymnastics, drawing, and a class called Nature, called Teva. In Hebrew, in the recreational facility called Matnas, that was adjacent to our school. Those classes were called chugim in Hebrew and took place outside of school hours. In nature, we learned about different animals and their interaction with the environment, and the animals that we were learning about would be brought for display. I also got to see from close up the jaw of a snake and its fangs without fearing it. All of those extracurricular activities cost money, and Grandma was paying. We got to build a whole zoo next to the entrance of the settlement, which, by the way, the entrance of who gets to get in and out of settlement was strictly guarded, as well as the entrance of a school. Every educational facility throughout all of Israel is fenced and closely guarded. In the United States, schools are not fenced and not guarded. Any stranger can come in. After school, I was going to another facility called Bet Talmid, which literally translates as House of Student, which was an after-school program that enriched and strengthened my social skills, where I was fed a well-balanced meal and had an appointed time to do homework and recreational stuff. I did not have to be told twice and be chased by teachers or my caretakers to do my homework. In fact, nobody forced anybody to do their homework. It was your responsibility to take the initiative to do homework. If your teacher found out you didn't do homework, she would let you have it. There was one period of time when Grandma detected a hole in the fence around our settlement that we were able to pass through. There was a forest beyond the fence, and she liked to get outside of it and collect mushrooms like how Grandma traditionally used to do in the Soviet Union. She would take me along for mushroom hunting, which was really fun. She taught me how to distinguish between poisonous and edible mushrooms. I didn't like eating the mushrooms, but I liked the thrill of looking for them. Eventually, the entire Russian community started getting out of that hole in the fence and collecting mushrooms. The Moatsa, the government of the settlement, found out about it, told us that we were out of our minds, and closed that hole. That was the abrupt end of our mushroom hunting adventure. One day, when I came home from the drawing class, Mom was visiting. For some reason, I was being saucy at Grandma about something, and Mom didn't like it, so she wrestled me to the floor and started kicking me in the stomach. Grandma joined. Great-Grandma tried to stop the two. While they were kicking me, I looked at the sign that Grandma had of a flamingo about to eat a frog, and the head of the frog was inside the flamingo's throat as the frog squeezed its throat at the same time. The sign said, "Don't give up," and I powered through my stamina as the two of them beat me. Shortly after I finished third grade, Dad convinced Mom to live with him and take me with her. I thought finally we would have a united family, and I would have both mother and father by my side. Little did I know how much havoc I was going to go through as well.